she won't forsake me, I live her.
Hello, welcome to Voices in the Wilderness. I am Pastor Lorraine Bouffard, Bishop of the Diocese of Connecticut for the American Ecumenical Catholic Church. I am flying solo today. I hope it's not so low that you don't hear me. But what I'm going to be talking about is experiencing God in thin places. I'll explain that in a little bit. But I'd like to tell you a little incident that happened to me when I was teaching kindergarten many years ago. I had given the children paper to do drawings, and there was one little girl who was working very, very diligently. And I went over to her and I said, tell me about your picture. And she said, I'm drawing God. And I said to her, but no one knows what God looks like. And without skipping a beat or looking up at me, she said, well, they will in a minute. So that's probably something that could have happened to that youngster. We're told that very young children do experience God. Outside of the practice of attending worship services, praying, or meditating, there are other ways for us to know and experience God in our daily lives. What is strange or sad is that people don't normally talk about these experiences because they feel people will think that they are weird and they don't want to be ridiculed. But we know as children we were taught that God is everywhere. Even St. Paul said that in God we live and move and have our being. Just before I made a recent trip to Scotland, England, and Wales, my spiritual therapist directed me to read a book by John O'Donohue. It's a bestseller. It's called Anam Cara, Spiritual Wisdom from the Celtic World. And in this book, this author explained how Celtic spirituality embraces the divine and nature, the underworld, and the human world, all as one. And borrowed from Celtic wisdom is the phrase, thin places. A thin place is where two levels of reality meet, and momentarily the veil lifts, and we behold God. And I'd like to tell you the story about someone who found a thin place. In 1941, at the age of 19, American John Gillespie McGee became a pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. He found his thin place flying his Spitfire aircraft, and he wrote this poem called High Flight. He died in combat just a few months after sending this poem to his parents. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up, up the long delirious burning blue, I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark nor eagle flew. And while with silent, lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. Few of us will literally experience piloting a flying craft like McGee. However, many of us can relate this poem if we read it as a metaphor of our experiences of sharing a passionate embrace with the one we love. We feel so much the divine presence that we call out the name of God. One of the books in Hebrew scripture is called the Song of Songs. Both the Jewish and Christian tradition realize how these poems that deal with human sexual love can lead to a higher love between humans and God. A small child once told his father that he figured out what the letters in the word Bible stood for. Basic instructions before leaving earth. Someone else wrote that Scripture is a signpost pointing the way to truth. If we cling to the signpost, then we are prevented from moving towards the truth because we think we have it already. Take, for example, how some people have difficulty with the concept of evolution, as it seems contradictory to the biblical account. Looking carefully at the undeniable evidence, our reason tells us that the cosmos is still an unfinished process. Theologian John Holt, author of God After Darwin, wrote that the fact of evolution now allows theology to apprehend more palpably than ever that creation is not just original, but an ongoing and constantly new reality. I would like to tell you a story that exemplifies this characteristic of creation and how people can evoke thin places. It is the story of Shay. In New York, there's this private religious school that caters to learning disabled children. And recently, they were having a fundraising event, and the father of one of the students was asked to deliver a speech. After praising the staff's commitment and saying how much he valued a Christian education, he said, "I'm disturbed that in Shay's religion class, he's been taught that everything God does is done with perfection. But my child cannot understand facts and figures as other students. Where is the perfection in my son Shay?" He could see that the audience was shocked by the piercing question. But he went on and he said, "I believe that when God brings a child like Shay into the world, the rest of us are given opportunities to enact God's presence and make change." I'd like to tell you all how I came about this revelation. One afternoon last week, Shay and I were walking past a park where some boys Shay knew were playing baseball. Shay asked me if I thought they would let him play. Now, you've got to know my son was not the least bit athletic, but I figured if they would let him play, it would give him a sense of belonging. So I went up to one of the boys and asked if Shay could play. The kid looked around at his other teammates, and they all shrugged their shoulders, so he figured it was all right with them. So he said to me, "Well, we're losing by 6 runs, and the game is in the second to last inning. I guess he can be on our team. We'll try to put him up at bat in the last inning." Well, I was ecstatic, and Shay smiled broadly. They gave him a glove and told him to play shortstop. In the bottom of the 8th inning, Shay's team scored a few runs, but they were still behind by 3. In the bottom of the 9th inning, Shay's team scored again.